Appeals meeting will come to order. I'll call the roll. Scott Bonfit,
Here.
Bob DeGroot, he's here. Michelle Mankey,
Here.
Krista Seidel,
Here.
Mike Love,
Here.
LaBote,
La Bouvet.
Labose. Oh, okay. William Vandehei,
Here.
Andy Van Mortal.
Here.
So, all present and accounted for. Approval of the minutes of the January 24th, 2022 Board of Appeals meeting.
I approve.
Second.
Motion by Bill, William,
Second.
second by Michelle. Any comments? All those in favor of the motion, of the February 28th meeting. Anyway, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public comments on matters not on the agenda. I don't see any members of the public here, is there? Yes, Peter?
You'll also want to ask online because there could be people attending virtually. It doesn't look like there is anyone, but you'll want to ask.
Okay.
No, there aren't any.
Nobody?
No.
All right, then we'll go on to number 4, discussion to introduce the new city attorney, Tony Wachewicz.
That is correct, but Tony's not here today. He's out of the office just sick, so he's not here today. So at the next meeting, we'll introduce Tony Wachewicz, the new city attorney.
All right. Then item number 5, discussion and refresher training for the review of variances and the role of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay. And
Here.
that will be me, thank you. As you recall, the last time we met, we had a training session because we hadn't had one in quite some time. Unusually, over the past year, we have not had any variance requests. We have had people ask for variances, but staff was able to work with the individuals to find alternative solutions to asking the Board of Appeals for a variance. I think part of what helped us to help people find a way was the understanding that you as a board are firmly looking for those justifications of hardships, and to make sure that because you haven't gathered for nearly a year now, that we want to make sure that you don't forget what that training was. So we are simply going to be repeating that. These 2 videos are actually the same videos that we watched a year ago in February. The two videos together are a total of 20 minutes, so I will play each of them, and then we can ask questions at the end of each video. The one thing I will let you know that is slightly different from last year, at that time we identified to you that shoreland variances was not an element that you review. That still is the case under the new zoning code. However, due to a rewrite of our shoreland zoning ordinance, that very soon will be something that you'll be reviewing. So when this section, when we get to the sections that are talking about shoreland zoning, you'll want to pay attention to them because within the next couple of months, that will be something that you potentially could be reviewing. So let me just kick in the first video called The Role of the Zoning Board. And I am not hearing my audio. So, Okay. Hold on a moment. It works perfectly in my office, and we're going to get it to work here.
That's for here. So let's try to see if we can do it for.
Who are the other two that are sitting there?
Dan is the one standing by the computer. That is
Last year was
mine
my
and
problem with
Peter's
the commercials. This year.
boss. He's the director of development services.
This year I'm
Is that-
prepared. All
He's
the,
in
all the
charge
commercials
of
are turned
planning,
on.
zoning, and
The main
business-
computer looked
building
like it was muted.
depart- the building department.
That's
And then
unmuted now.
Chelsea sitting there. She's one of
It's
the
like the
building
volume was all the way
inspectors.
down.
And we have Dennis Jensen. He's a senior building
Yeah.
inspector, and then Chelsea, another building inspector.
Exit out of here.
Is Dennis still around?
That's just the
Dennis
volume for
is still-
speakers
yep.
here. That's not the microphone, but we can try it for here. See if it connects to everything.
Well, while they're trying to get that, would the young lady introduce herself, please?
Oh, I'm Chelsea Myers. I'm one of the building inspectors for the city.
Okay.
Let's see.
Chelsea is one of the individuals who helps us help the public understand their alternatives to petitioning variances. She's usually the first line of defense, and when something is heading in the direction of this board for a variance, Chelsea is the first person that those individuals have usually met, and then they end up coming to me and then ultimately meeting with you.
And the gentleman sitting alongside of you?
This is Dan Lindstrom. He is our Development Services Director. He oversees the department that Chelsea and I are part of.
I'm gonna try to load it up on my computer and do a screen share because that one's not doing it that way.
Okay. Yeah, my other alternative, I thought, would be to pop it into my laptop and then project it through. So sorry to make you wait as we figure out our audio issue.
We do have two new members if they want to introduce themselves as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can. Would you like to introduce our two new Board of Appeals members?
Hi, I'm Krista Seidel.
And I am Mike Labouvet.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad he didn't ask to introduce the full members.
Okay. Computer.
Oh,
I was trying to figure it out the other day. Between you and I, how many years have we got on this board? You know? I figured minimum 20 years apiece.
oh, at least. Because I got on the board in 1979, I think. I was appointed.
You've been on the board this whole time?
Huh?
Since 1979 till now?
No, not 30.
Okay. The other alternative I have is I could just completely go out of the video and then
Go right into videos.
play it.
No
just play it straight up.
wonder you know everything.
Yeah.
In 1939, he was already 10 years old.
When I lost the mayor's race the first time, I wasn't on then. It was the second time, I guess. 1980, 1989, I think I was put on board. So.
Looking for your boards and agendas.
Yeah, that's where I thought I
You
had it.
realize
I had it
next
there, but-
year,
Yeah, I'm gonna be lucky to get.
You were in the PowerPoints, not.
50 years since I was mayor.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Whoa. How many years have you been since you were, you used to be a teacher, right? You were a teacher?
Yeah.
How many years since you retired from teaching?
28.
2020?
28.
28, holy
Peter, I dropped him in there.
Did you get it?
I dropped him in there.
older than some of the people.
Under
Your agendas.
I've been retired for 26.
Yeah. And he's younger than I
Or
am.
HPC and
I retired
Back out
when I
one.
was 55.
or two. Nope, that's not what I meant by that.
I retired when I was 58.
Here. Can we drive you?
Yeah, I'm just lost where I am. There we go. Since only playing this.
I don't know how to get it out to here.
We got any techies still here?
Jamie's in there.
You want to
Jamie's here.
see if she's in there? Yeah, the other problem is, Peter, you also closed down your share screen agenda.
Is there other alternative is to have you watch them at home and have you answer questions? Yeah, so if I go into the PowerPoint itself, we should be able to play this.
It only plays this.
It's only playing at this, it's not playing in the,
Template markup from the Center for Land Use Education. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started.
don't know why. Okay,
I don't know.
okay.
Is there a volume button?
I don't have a volume.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that what we're going to have to do then is save this for a future time. Either I'll have you watch these at home, and then I'll reach out to each of you individually to see if you have questions, and then we can just move on to the next agenda item. I apologize for wasting your time on this when I can't get my technology to work.
Last time it was easy. We just hit play and everything worked just
Everything worked,
perfectly
yeah.
fine. So who knows what this time
It
is? So.
happens. It happens.
So my suggestion is that as we move on to agenda item number 6, and I can spend some time talking about the new zoning code that we have in place with a new set of rules for you to follow. And so with item number 6, let me see if I can bring this out to a full screen for you. There we go.
Technically, there has to be a motion to move item number 5 to the next meeting. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
need a table or a motion to table then agenda item number 5.
Well, it's not an action item, so you don't really.
Okay, then we're okay then.
Yeah, everything
Let's-
is
we'll just move
everything is
on.
discussion tonight. So for item number 6, on January 1st, 2023, the new zoning ordinance went into place. It was a project that we've been working on since about 2018. It was slowed down a little bit because of COVID and our inabilities to reach to certain organizations at that time. And we wanted to make sure we were doing the project right. So we spent until December 20th, 2022 was when our council approved the ordinance that we have as is. It is designed to be much more user-friendly with intentions from staff. It is set up in 3 segments. One segment kind of demonstrates graphics and illustrations for the general public with quick tables to understand. The second section has photographs and images to help describe those tables. And the third section has the text, so when something becomes technical and we need to involve an attorney, we can always rely on the actual verbiage of the document. That's why this code is a little bit longer than we wanted it to be originally. It's about 200 pages, but it tends to work really well that way. Both the new zoning map and the new zoning ordinance became effective on January 1st. I know I already was asked before this meeting started, how do you get to these documents? For the zoning ordinance, it is available to you if you would like a copy. And hard copy, we can print one for you. Keep in mind that we do update it. We will be updating it quarterly, so it will only be good for you for about 3 or 4 months. But if you wanted to get to a live version of the ordinance, there are 3 ways. One is on our website right now. You can see that square in the middle that says Planning and Zoning Division. We have a speed button there that identifies where you can click to get to the new zoning ordinance. It is also available through what is called MuniCode. This is an online computer program that provides access to all of the chapters of our municipal code. And then also simply just by doing a search engine search by typing in De Pere zoning code or De Pere zoning ordinance will actually take you to this page. As for the zoning map, you can get to it through the web page the very same way we used to with the old zoning map. It just now is updated with the new colors, or a search engine looking for De Pere GIS will take you to our zoning map. I put two samples from the zoning map in GIS that you can see. As you can tell here, originally when you kind of looked at that northeast area on the east side of the Fox River, there was red and there was yellow and maybe a little bit of gray for industrial, but you kind of saw those two general colors. We've now broken it down into a multitude of colors to assist with different lot sizes and particularly to assist with some of our historic neighborhoods, which cause people to come to this committee quite often. Because of having small lot sizes, and our old zoning code was written for kind of that larger suburban type lot. So now getting into the zoning categories, as you can see in the grayed out section on the left side of each of these columns, that's from our old zoning code what those zoning categories were. They're broken down into 4 basic district categories of residential, mixed use, commercial and employment, and special districts. So the R1, R2 was our original residential categories. They're now listed as like R1 45, R1 60, 80, R2, and RM. R1 is symbolic of a single unit. R2 is a 2-unit house. RM would be a multiple unit structure. The 45, 60, and 80 that you see represents the minimum street frontage that those lots would require. So that's how we made some accommodations for some of our smaller lot neighborhoods by creating an R1 45 zoning category to help accommodate those lots that are smaller than our larger suburban lots. Our commercial and special districts, not a whole lot of change happened other than in the special districts we created what is called a PI category. You see the PI1 and PI2 in the upper right hand corner, and a PUD category. The PI is where a lot of our religious institutions, schools, parks, things of that nature were placed. They originally fell under R for residential, and it was difficult for us to make special accommodations or for them to make accommodations for their own special needs, particularly when you're dealing with something like St. Norbert College or a church that might have a special setback requirement. They now can accommodate their needs in their own zoning category. PUD is actually new for us. We used to have PDD, Planned Development District, which was an overlay that sat on top of an existing zoning category. We've now eliminated that. Historic PDDs will continue to exist, but new ones cannot be created because they've been replaced with PUD, which is an actual zoning category, which can be developed with its own setback criteria. The introductory chapter or the introductory section of the code, you will find that there are 16 subsections within that chapter. The areas that will be most important to us as a Board of Appeals will most likely be the first 5 articles, Article 2 through 5, because that's what establishes the setback and dimensional criteria for residential, mixed-use, commercial, and special districts. We don't, as a Board of Appeals, approve uses, but we do approve, we do consider approving things that are more dimensional related, like setbacks, and that's where these chapters are where those sections will come from. I do have this slideshow to show everything if you would like to see it, but the first 18 pages of this slide will actually accommodate the areas that are going to be most important to you. That's where I've circled this. That's why, as our general public looks at this, they can quickly find answers to what are their setbacks? How can they build their building? Do they need street-facing windows? That's particularly in the mixed-use district. That's the name that we use for our downtown businesses. Or commercial and employment districts, which tend to be our business parks and industrial park. Does the facade need a special detail like a shadow line? And then where can I park my cars in a parking lot, or where can I put a garbage dumpster? Those types of questions can be answered in these 5 chapters. When you look into the code now, it's not just a bunch of text, as you may recall from the old code. It was very text heavy. It now has tables like this with simple dots. In this case, this is for the residential district. It identifies all the different types of residential houses that would be allowed. The black dot identifies that it's allowed or not allowed in a particular zoning district. One would identify what their house type is. They then jump to this table to find what their zoning is, and that will tell them their setbacks, requirements, and things of that nature. A simple table so that if they're looking for a particular property, and they realize this zoning category doesn't work, they can realize what the next door zoning category is and what could work for them if they're shopping for a property. If they realize that it just doesn't work, they can also compare to other zoning districts to see how far different it is from other people. Then the third layer to this to help people out are the kind of those graphics and images, and that's what I put in that lower left corner, where this shows kind of a footprint of 3 buildings on 3 properties, showing that how they're meeting their setback criteria and access to the back of the property. Like this one, it's showing access coming in from the side. This one is showing coming in from like an alley in the rear. And then this lower image is showing building height. One thing that's different is 8 residential building types being defined. Of course, we've increased the size of accessory building square footage. I think that's one of the #1 things that you have reviewed and have perpetually approved. So we simply made that accommodation so that people aren't coming for Board of Appeals variances when it's something that is regularly being approved. We've clarified where accessory buildings can be placed. One of the common questions from our old code was, they're only allowed in the rear yard, why can't I put it beside my house? So there are some accommodations for accessory buildings to be placed on the sides of houses in certain situations. Then, as I mentioned, things like parks and schools have been moved from the residential district into the PI district. We've added civic buildings. That would be things like a fire station or a city hall, where and how it can be placed in these residential districts. And then the one thing that we received a lot of requests about, and I think a lot of our public is interested in, are backyard cottages. That's where people are saying, can I build a small house in my backyard so that mom can live with me because she's good enough to live by herself, but she wants to live near us, and we don't need to be putting her into a nursing home yet. Can we build this cottage in the backyard? We now can do that in the city of Green Bay. I'm sorry, in the city of De Pere. Can you tell where I used to work? So we have those accommodations. There are limits to the size and who can live there. They can't be used as a short-term rental. It has to be something that relates to those who own the property. Here are some samples that we're showing, because we are introducing smaller and narrower lot sizes. That when we talk about houses that fit onto a 45-foot lot, we're talking about houses like this. This is a house fitting on a 45-foot lot, a house fitting on a 60-foot lot, and an 80-foot lot. So we still are allowing for a diversity of housing stock with these different sizes. Then moving into mixed-use categories. This is something you review a little bit less because this is kind of talking more about our businesses in our downtown district, but you may occasionally get a variance request for that. In this case, there are 6 mixed-use building types defined. We did add something new called primary frontage. That's where certain streets like Main Avenue and Broadway Street are identified as being a little bit more special to us than say, another side street. And there's a more detailed requirement, building facade requirement for buildings in those areas. We did alter our minimum and maximum building heights. We updated our parking requirements and clarified our building transparency. In these areas, you primarily would be looking at things still related to setbacks. Those building facades and designs would lie more in the hands of our Plan Commission than Board of Appeals. Here's a map as a sample of that primary frontage that I was talking about. This shows up on our zoning map now. You can see the heavy black line of Main Avenue, actually part of Reed Street, Broadway going northward, and down just past City Hall and George Street. Those, in our first wave of utilizing primary frontage streets, are the streets that the city is utilizing. Commercial and employment districts, these are areas in our business and industrial park on both the east and west side of the city of De Pere. In this area, we've expanded the building facade materials that are allowed. That's something that you don't normally review. But we also did adjust lot size requirements, allowing for lots to be smaller. So there may be some requests that we will see for building setbacks and things of that nature, which again is something that you would review. Then we've added a cleaner table for our agricultural category. It's always been in our code. It just was kind of added in because it was added to our zoning categories after our zoning code was originally written. This was just created to help it appear to be part of and properly part of the code. And of course, you can see that there are references to the PI districts again, and PUD. We then move into, once we move past this page, we start to move into something that you really don't talk about as Board of Appeals. So I don't know if you want me to give you a real high summary of it, or if you would like me to kind of end my presentation at this point. I'll leave that choice to you.
We'll take a quick high summary.
Okay, I'll do that, and I'll try not to bore you with details. Chapter 7 goes into uses. If you remember your original code version, every district had a list of permitted uses and sometimes even a list of restricted uses. What we did is pulled that all into one chapter, into one table, so that if you are saying, hey, I want to find one particular use, is it allowed in that district? You're not now flipping to all 18 districts of the original code. Now we have 22, to all 22 districts to see, is it allowed, is it allowed, is it allowed 22 times. You can now turn to this one page, look up your generalized and use category and see, okay, it's allowed in 6 different districts. So if I'm trying to bring a business to the city, or if I'm trying to build a certain type of house in a residential district, I can immediately look at this table and recognize that type of use is or is not allowed. So if I'm shopping for a property, I now know that, okay, it's not allowed here, but it is allowed over here. Is that what I'm looking for in the city of De Pere? So it helps people to find a place in De Pere that works for them. And it also helps for our existing residents to identify right away whether or whether or not their use is allowed on their property. Then as you can see right here in the lower area, there's a thing called home occupation. That's one of the things that was a pretty significant change for us. We've always allowed home occupations in the city of De Pere. They have to be relatively unnoticed, and the only person who can be operating that home occupation is basically the property owner. That's what we have in here as type A now. We've introduced a new type B, which allows a property owner to bring in an employee from outside of their residence. They can't bring in 10 employees because then they're a business. But if they brought in 1 employee from outside of their house, they're allowed to have a home occupation. They do need to get approval through the city to do that for that type B version. They can't just automatically go ahead and start. Then the next chapter, or the next subsection, goes into parking, building, and landscape. This really more relates to assisting people who are going to be submitting a site plan. So what we did is we modernized the requirements in these categories. So for example, parking, we had parking requirements from the 90s. Cars are different sizes now, and sometimes we have people who would tend to carpool or use an Uber or Lyft, which didn't exist at that time. So those parking accommodations are much better matched to what today's needs are. We also updated parking lot designs and their capabilities with updated dimensions. And then in things like a drive-through or a queuing line, we've updated the number of stalls that are required in those stall requirements. That's kind of what you see in this table right here. I think in our original code, it was generically 8 stalls for every business, no matter what type of business it is. It now breaks down to the specific use types and sets a special queuing line category criteria for that use. So it might be a little bit higher for a fast food restaurant, might be a little bit lower for a bank. Then another thing that we've added is actually allowing for credits for parking lots. If you have a business, like here you can see in this picture, this is Luna Coffee Shop. If they have a certain amount of street frontage and there is already street parking there, they can claim 1 street parking stall towards their parking lot requirement. So if, for example, and I'm just pulling a number out of the air, they're required to have 5 parking stalls for their business. Because of the frontage they have, they can claim that 1 public stall on the street is really there for them. So their parking lot in the rear is really only required to have 4, and their 5th lot is somewhere along Main Avenue. It doesn't mean that they get 1 guaranteed spot. It's just somewhere along that street can become theirs. Another criteria is incorporating things like shared parking or bicycle parking. So I used the McDonald's out almost by the freeway as my example here. They incorporated, when they built this building, an area for bicycle parking at the front of their building. Unfortunately, it's not enough to give them a parking lot credit, but if there was more bicycle parking, they could have counted that and reduced their number of parking stalls by 1 in their parking lot. So there's a number of different ways that businesses can utilize to reduce their parking if there are other alternative places for their public to be parking. And I appreciate you kind of going through this, because as a board member, people may ask you these questions even though they're not necessarily Board of Appeals related. One thing you did hear me mention earlier is facade materials being updated. In our original code, there were typically about 6 facade materials that would be allowed, and they were kind of generalized as saying masonry, brick, glass, stone. But it didn't tell you how to put it on your building. It didn't tell you where to put it on your building. It just said, these are the materials you can use. We now have broken down into a much longer list of a table and a percentage of how much can or must be used in certain scenarios. And certain materials may be allowed in one district, but not in another. So where it might be a little bit more acceptable to have a metal pole building type facade in the back of an industrial park, that might be perfectly okay. But that might not be something we want on the front of a facade in our downtown district. So this table helps to accommodate that diversity of materials that we've seen people asking for over the past several years. And then we've also incorporated graphics to help people that are doing design work where and how to place these materials onto your building. We're not trying to be the design gurus to say you must make it look like this, but what we're saying is if you are using a particular material and say you're bringing it to a corner, don't just abruptly change your material and go to a second material. it needs to be finished off by wrapping it around the corner and finishing it on kind of an inner edge. So like that's what this gray area is showing here is this is the front of the building, it wraps around to the side, and then at this point, this is an okay point at which you would change your building material. Then next is landscaping, and I know that's something I don't think ever has come to the Board of Appeals. We always have had landscaping requirements, but it's been a generic count of number of trees that are required based on the size of a property or the number of square feet exist for a building. But it doesn't help by designating where or how that landscaping should be placed. So people like the three of us are oftentimes challenged with somebody saying, well, the code says I need 10 trees, I'm putting them all in the backyard. Well, that's not very helpful for beautifying our pure properties. And then we're challenged with fighting to get those trees into the right place. Now it's broken down into elements of right-of-way or street frontage trees, landscaping within a parking lot, landscaping within the lot, foundation landscaping, which is landscaping which is up against a building, and then landscaping that's used to screen things. So now that we have these 5 or 6 different sets of categories, when a developer comes to us and says, well, how shall we do our landscaping plan? I can look back to them and say, well, you know what, it's up to you, but you need to meet this criteria. And it helps them with knowing what they will be expected to do with their landscaping plan in order to see us give them a green light of approval. And here's just a sample of street trees being in the right-of-way versus street trees being on private property, which is kind of what you see in this picture here. We've updated our sign code. I don't know if you were aware, but our sign code actually stood completely separate from our zoning code as Chapter 98. We've now absorbed the two together into one chapter. Because we are working with parking and building and site design and landscaping, it only seemed to make sense to also pull signage into the zoning code at the same time, and that's what we did. Updating it again with the simplistic type tables, so one can look at this and say, okay, I want a certain type of sign. I want a pull sign. I have a bank. I want to put a big tall pull sign in the front yard. Does my zoning district allow that? I can go across here, look for the dot that says yes or no. You are allowed to have pull signs on that particular property. One then can go further in and find tables that will give criteria about how high or tall a sign can be, how many square feet it can be, how can I illuminate it, and answer those types of questions very quickly and easily without having to call and ask staff. One of the things that's the really big change with our sign ordinance is becoming content neutral. Chelsea is the one who's burdened with this the most, is looking at signs that are placed in the right location, particularly temporary signs. We no longer can really look at and read the sign to say, hey, that sign is selling this. We're going to call it this sign. Or that sign is advertising somebody who wants to vote. We're going to call that an election sign. Or that's a for sale sign. We can't look at signs that way anymore. We can only look at them as if they're a permanent sign of a certain type or a temporary sign. And as you can see in these samples here, there's this vote today, this open house, for sale, garage sale, and then just rando signs along a little walkway. These all fall into the same category, temporary signs. So I can't have somebody call me up anymore and say, hey, there's an election sign in the wrong place, because I can't look at it that way. I look at it as if it's a temporary sign, and then it must follow the criteria in this table here. So one of the things that, we are recognizing is there is an aldermanic election coming up in the next couple of months. They all have to follow these rules for their temporary signs. One of the biggest things that we got in the first couple of weeks of the code was recognizing that a lot of temporary signs were not properly set back from the property lines. So there were several phone calls that were made to say, hey, you want to quickly move your sign so we don't have to write you a letter about it. And then other significant sign changes that we made, mostly related to the size of signs. We helped to make it to better accommodate the zoning district. We originally had a sign code that said, if you are a wall sign, you are allowed a sign this big. It didn't really pay attention to whether that was a sign where you were driving 25 miles an hour in downtown on Main Avenue, or if you were out getting ready to get onto the freeway driving past McDonald's and Aldi. So wall signs are now adjusted for those different districts so that they are going to be a little bit larger in areas where traffic might be traveling faster, and they might be a little bit smaller in those areas where we're more likely to be driving slower and to have pedestrians that are close to the sign that are able to read it without it being the entire back wall behind me. And that comes to the end of my presentation on updates and changes to the zoning code. I don't know if you have, I know I went really fast and that's a lot of information. If you have questions about how the zoning code works, or if there are questions you might have about how to get to the zoning code, now would be the time to ask them.
I'll add one more to that from Peter. As Peter mentioned, our primary goals when it came to the residential, which is what a lot of this board sees, is to take a lot of our older existing homes that are in our existing neighborhoods and make them conforming. That's what we dealt with so long ago. Was our code at some point in its history decided that everything in this community needed to be large lot curvilinear. Well, that forgets the fact that we had so many of our neighborhoods that are of the 60-foot wide, the 40-foot wide. So that was the real impetus for pushing the flexibility to give those existing owners so that when they tore down a garage and wanted to rebuild, they could rebuild it as it was originally supposed to be intended to. They're not having to comply with a lot line that was for an 80-foot wide lot. So that was our goal, and I believe that was a charge by this board, was to really give us that flexibility. And that's what we've spent a lot of time working through. But Peter did also mention that we've added very, I guess you would say, more clear design standards for a lot of our commercial employment and mixed-use districts. Now, that may look like we're becoming overburdensome, but really what it's doing is just taking standards that we had and kind of just being more clear with how they're supposed to be implemented. There was a lot of gray area in our last code because it was, again, added to over time. So by doing a comprehensive rewrite, we were able to take those design standards, clarify them so that we can get a little bit more clearer picture. So with that, though, comes a trade-off. With clarity, we want to also make the process easier for the general public, developers, applicants to make their process. So one big change, monumental shift for the city of De Pere is, if we've done all of this work and we've said people this is exactly what we want, what trade-off are we going to give to them? And we've made it a simpler and more concise approval process. So we've taken it from everything must go to Plan Commission to, if you do everything that's in this code, you've done everything right, your staff level approval. We'll still be transparent with it by putting it on the web so people can see what's been approved. But if the Plan Commission can't make any changes because they've met elements of the code, why hold a development project up 30, 40, 45, 60 days just to be at a Plan Commission meeting? So we're trying to kind of have that trade-off of, if we're getting exactly what we said we wanted and they're giving it to us, why make them wait? Let's go through the staff approval process. Now, that being said, if somebody comes in and says, I met 90% of your things, I still 10% short, I'd like to do something differently, there's still an avenue for design relief from the Plan Commission, so it's still a Plan Commission level review there. So from an overall design aesthetic standpoint, there is still some flexibility there. But if someone's come and done everything we've asked for, let's reward them with a quicker time frame and a quicker approval process, because we've laid out so much more stuff in front of them. So those are two, I guess you would say, big changes, one of which I said was kind of a driver from this committee. And then the second one was Wisconsin's construction cycle is only so long, so let's make sure that we're getting what we want and we make it a better process for everybody. So that's it.
Thank you, Dan. So are there any questions that you have of us as the staff at this point?
I have two. One, I saw that the driveway thing has been changed. We had numerous occasions where city people would come in and they'd have three stall garage, and could not understand why they couldn't have more than an 11-foot base going up to that garage from the street till they got on the other side of the sidewalk? Has that's been changed?
What we did is we expanded the width of, like, in the case of like a single family house. We have expanded the allowed width at the property line for the driveway going to the garage. And then we very much clarified how wide and how quickly a driveway can expand once it's going past that property line.
So in other words, 11-foot base at street side is still in effect.
I believe
It's a single household. Maximum width at the property line is 15, flares out to 25 at the street. So you have your typical flares for when you're turning in from each way direction, 25 foot on a single family household, and then it flares down at a maximum of 5 feet on each side to 15 foot at your property line. So that's when you get your typical, kind of swooping in from out.
Okay, my other question was for Crystal. Has to do with signs. I cannot tell you how many women on my street have come to me and said, I'm having a garage sale. I put out my signs, and the police brought them back and said, if you put them out again, you'll pay a fine.
The only way the police department would be grabbing a sign like that is if it's in a public right-of-way situation. So if they're placing it on the other side of the sidewalk adjacent to the street, absolutely they will grab that sign. It's got to be on the side of the sidewalk that is adjacent to the house. That is the only time in which our police department typically would grab something, or in more cases, it would actually be the Parks Department because they are the kind of the keepers or managers of the terraced area. So I do get calls where our forester or our Parks Department has grabbed those signs because they are in the public right-of-way. If it's in the right-of-way or if it's on the private property, I haven't heard of a case in which it's been grabbed like that. So.
Okay.
Yep. And then to add to Dan's comments, a garage sale sign would fall under that category of the temporary sign. As you can see, the yard sale or garage sale sign is one of our samples. If it is properly placed as a freestanding sign, like you see in that picture, it does need to be set back 5 feet from their property line. If it's at that location, then nobody should be grabbing that sign and pulling it away.
And even if it's in within that 5 feet, we're not going to grab it. Chelsea will go out there, look at it. If it's pretty obvious that it's too close, usually to vision triangles and vision clearance, things coming out of driveways, Chelsea will contact the owner and give them days to correct and remedy the situation. We're not going to be heavy-handed. That's not who.
Not on private property.
Not on private property.
If it's in the right of way, we pick them up depending on what they are. I've never personally removed a garage sale sign, so.
Well, I have no problem with the garage sale signs. What I have problems with is the women on the street coming to me and say, how come? I don't want to argue with
That
them.
would be a question for PD.
Yeah, and that's as Dan had mentioned, that's probably a case where they put it between the sidewalk and the street, or somewhere where it's technically in the right of way, so it's considered an abandoned sign in the right of way. Just as similar to dropping a piece of trash, it's something considered abandoned.
And the biggest problem we have with the signs in the right of way are the companies that advertise. So we'll get different companies just plopping their signs down roads. So those we will remove.
Same is true about those attached to telephone poles, per se.
We'd like to. Those are a lot more.
Hard to remove.
Well, they're all stapled, like 14 staples per sign, and
Yeah.
so it all depends on. But yes, if those are in public right of way, if someone's available, somebody will grab them. Obviously, if it's not a police department getting out of a police officer getting out of a car and pulling them off. But in most cases, we do try to keep things in the right of way pretty clean because it is public property and not private.
I also saw the word flex being used earlier with some of the commercial festival, for example. Is that they're now allowed to go to a larger sign presence? Is that what that meant?
So a couple examples to that one. The festival, not so much because they got approval because they were under a PDD before, so their sign was already even bigger than what our previous code was. The situation came in with Menards and with Walmart and a variety of others. Those also came finally under a PDD. But really, That was the reason why those were under PDDs, is because our old sign ordinance kind of kept things really far away. And the Plan Commission was the appeal body when it came to signs under Chapter 98. The most recent example is the United Health building on the highway. If the Plan Commission wouldn't have deviated from that standard, that sign that you see on the upper floor, it would have had to have been on the bottom floor, and it would have had to have been about a third of the size, and it would have just looked really awkward for the shape of the building and location. So this is giving us that opportunity to scale a sign relative to the portion of the building and the location on the subject street.
And that's where, in this case, where it's saying flexible, what it's referring to is the further away the building is from the street. Not that we want to encourage buildings to be built way, way away from the street, but if it's in that scenario where that's just the way it is, there are certain accommodations where the sign can be bigger as it moves further away from that public right of way. So that's why you see kind of in that box I kind of put on top of everything, it references 2 square feet per linear feet up to 150 feet. But then if it's more than 250 feet away, then it can go to the number 200. If it's 750 feet away, it can go up to 450 square feet. And those numbers were captured, as Dan had mentioned, from requests for buildings that were in this scenario. For example, Walmart about 2 years ago was doing updates to their signs, and they were struggling with trying to fit a 100-foot wall sign when they are 700 feet away from the street.
So as a result of the training we did last February or
Yes.
January, we did meet, we haven't met since. So based on some of the new verbiage in the code, do we anticipate not having to get together as often because of how the code's laid out now?
Yes and no. What we did, when reviewing this code is we did look at, what were the items that were coming to Plan Commission over and over and over that were hiccuping? What were the items that came to Board of Appeals over and over and over that were requiring special permissions or forcing people to identify hardships? Were they valid requests, or were they things that really should be proven with a hardship? So because of that, I think there are a number of things that people won't be coming to you anymore, particularly because we now have made those accommodations for our older and historic neighborhoods. That was one of the things I know that you kind of asked us if we could just let things get approved, but we couldn't. We still had to follow the code and send them over to you. But now our code helps to accommodate that. Best example, lots that are 45 feet wide used to have 10-foot side yard setbacks, which left 25 feet of width of buildable space. They now have 6-foot side yard setbacks. So that bought an extra 8 feet of space for building. I'm sure there still will be scenarios where there's an existing building that still just can't make it work. And I think those are going to be the projects we're going to see. So bottom line, yes, I do believe that there will be fewer requests for variances. I also believe that, and we've all kind of seen that over the last several years, the number of requests that were coming to us were dropping because people were becoming to be more willing to work on alternative solutions. And for that, I kind of credit our inspection staff, individuals like Chelsea, for trying to work with those property owners to find alternatives. So kind of that combination of the code now working better for us for a diversity of lot housing at lot sizes, and our inspection staff working with individuals. Yeah, I think we're probably going to have fewer requests. And 2022 is probably the perfect example of where we went from having 1 or 2 requests in January to 11 months of silence.
Anyone else? Well, we thank you for the explanations.
You're very welcome. And I apologize for agenda item number 5.
Peter and I are also available for any questions. If you're reviewing the code and you have any questions, feel free to just give us a call. We've been staring at this thing for better part of Peter for 4 years, me for 3, and it's been ingrained in our brain, and we're trying to we're trying to forget the old code now, and now we're trying to remember the new one. So if it takes us a little bit to get you an answer, that's just the way it is for the first little bit here, but we're more than willing to answer any questions that you may have. Just give us a call. And that is it.
Any further? And a motion for adjournment is in order.
A motion to adjourn?
Second.
Have a motion from Andy and second from William. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that want to stay say no. Thank you.
No, every time.